Namaste, welcome back. A very good morning to all of you. Let's start the 33rd lecture of a lecture series on Indigenous Knowledge System from the Earth for the Future. This is Professor Ajit Jaiswal, Head Department of Anthropology. Today I will discuss on Indigenous Knowledge Systems and contemporary relevance, challenges and preservation. This is a very important area. We will discuss about the contemporary relevance. We'll discuss about the challenges, we'll discuss about the preservation and revitalization and so on. These are the important area of the content of the present lecture. In the last lecture, if you remember, we discussed about the distinction between indigenous knowledge system and modern knowledge systems. A very important one. If you have missed, then see the link given over there. Series of such lectures of a lecture series on indigenous knowledge system from the Earth for the Future is already given. You can go through that particular lecture also. Then you will get a lot of information that will be highly useful for all of you. Remember, these are the important core areas of most of the competitive examination nowadays. They used to ask series of questions related to Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, indigenous knowledge systems, their importance, their relevance and about the Bharat. This will play a very important role to make the distinction between the generalized knowledge and specialized knowledge. This is the important area even in the NET UPSC and UGC examination of the anthropology also. So if you are preparing, if you are thinking about your future in the field of anthropology, if you are thinking about to cracking the UPSC examination, UGC NET examination, state public service examination, this is a very important area. And if you follow the description that is given over there, I'm sure your way of analysis, understanding and representing will improve or polish a lot. If you remember, in the last lecture, we discussed about the distinction between indigenous and modern knowledge systems, where we give prioritized importance about how to make the distinction between the two, how it is related to one another, how one knowledge system, which is known to be the traditional classical knowledge system or traditional native knowledge, whereas the other knowledge system called as Western science, both are to a great extent is a need of ours. Both have its own relevance and importance. And if you are looking for the solution of the existing several generalized problem, we have to think in both the manner. So today we'll try to discuss about indigenous knowledge system and contemporary relevance, challenges and preservation. Let's start discussing about them. The contemporary relevance, challenges and preservation of indigenous knowledge systems are critical issues that intersect with broader discussion on cultural diversity, sustainable development, social justice and environmental conservation. Now let's try to explore each aspect one by one. First, contemporary relevance. Indigenous knowledge systems offer valuable insight and solution to address contemporary challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, public health, food security and social equality. Traditional ecological knowledge, for example, provide sustainable resource management practices that promote resilience to environmental challenges and contribute to biodiversity conservation. Indigenous medical knowledge offer alternative approaches to healthcare that are culturally appropriate, accessible and often cost effective, complementing modern medicinal treatment. Similarly, if you see the cultural practices and ritual embedded within the indigenous knowledge system, they foster social cohesion, community resistance and cultural revitalization, contributing to mental health and well-being. Next important point is challenges. Indigenous knowledge systems they face numerous challenges including marginalization, erosion and exploitation. Indigenous communities often experience discrimination, land dispositions, forced assimilation and loss of cultural identity, undermining the transmissions and preservation of traditional knowledge. Environmental degradation, climate change and globalization pose threat to traditional livelihood, ecosystem and cultural landscape, disrupting indigenous way of life and diminishing the validity of indigenous knowledge system. Even if you see there is economic pressure, urbanization and modernization contribute to the decline of traditional practices, decline of traditional transmission within the indigenous communities As younger generation, they seek opportunity. They look for the outside intervention or the opportunity to outside of their ancestral tradition territories. Similarly, the third important point is preservation and revitalization. So effort to preserve and revitalize indigenous knowledge system involve various strategies including documentation, intergenerational transmission, cultural education and community empowerment. Remember, all these are really very important points. If you have remembered the point related to the new national education policy, new national education policy 2020 is discussed about all these things, and almost all the educational institutions, they gave stress to all these points. If you have a additive point, positive point, if you remember all these points, obviously your way of understanding, your way of representation, your way of explanations about the indigenous knowledge system, Bharati Gyan Parampara, indigenous concept will be much more broader, much more diverse, much more explanatory than any other person concerned. Remember, the another important point is documentation initiatives aims to record and archive traditional knowledge through oral histories, ethnographic research, multimedia resource and digital repositories, ensuring that indigenous knowledge is preserved for future generations. In intergenerational transmission programs, promote the passing down of traditional knowledge from elders to the youth through apprenticeship, through mentorship and cultural education program within the indigenous community. Cultural revitalization effort focuses on reclaiming and celebrating indigenous language, rituals, ceremonies, and artistic expression, fostering pride in cultural heritage and strengthening community identity. Even the community-led initiative for indigenous rights, land lectures, and self-governance empower indigenous people to assert their rights, to protect their territories and preserve their traditional knowledge system in the face of external pressure. So overall, after seeing all the three dimensions, either from the point of view of contemporary relevance